At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law laughed and said, "Poor Eleanor, still trying to act like she's important." My son Evan added with contempt, "My father died without a penny." My grandchildren were whispering about my miserable family, mocking my worn-out shoes and my tears. Even my sister, Carol, stayed silent, looking the other way. And then, 3 black BMWs pulled up in front of the church. Men in suits got out, walked directly over to me, bowed, and said, "Mrs. Grant, the board of directors is waiting. There are secrets so heavy they can crush a person, and there are silences that, when finally broken, can destroy an entire family." For 40 years, I kept a secret. And that day, in front of my husband's casket, that secret was about to come out in the most devastating way possible. My name is Eleanor. I am 66 years old. And the story I am about to tell began long before that humiliating funeral. It began when I met Arthur. I was 26 years old and working as a secretary in a small import-export office. He was the owner. A man of 35, serious, ambitious, with dreams bigger than his bank account. We fell in love quickly. He saw something in me that no one else had seen, a brilliant mind for business. I saw in him a partner, an equal. We were married 6 months after we met. The first few years were difficult. The company was barely surviving. Arthur worked 18 hours a day, but he lacked organization, strategic vision. One night, I found him in the office, his head in his hands, surrounded by unpaid invoices. "I'm going to lose everything," he murmured. I sat down next to him, took the papers, and started to review them. In 3 hours, I had reorganized his entire financial structure. In 2 weeks, I had renegotiated contracts with suppliers. In 1 month, the company stopped bleeding money. Arthur looked at me that night with something more than love. He looked at me with respect. "You're a genius," he said. And so we made a pact. He would be the public face of the business. I would be the brains behind it. Together, we would build an empire. And we did. For 40 years, we worked as a single organism. He closed deals. I designed strategies. He gave speeches. I wrote every word. He signed contracts. I had secretly negotiated them for weeks. Nobody knew. Nobody could know. In those days, a woman in charge was unthinkable. So, we adapted. We had a son. Evan was born when I was 29. I loved him with every fiber of my being, but even from a young age, Arthur saw something in him that broke my heart. He was weak, manipulable, with no vision. "He can't inherit this," Arthur told me when Evan turned 20. "He'll lose it all in 5 years." It hurt to hear it, but I knew he was right. Evan was my son, but he was not a leader. The years passed. The company grew. From imports, we moved to manufacturing, then to real estate investments, then to technology. By the time we were 50, we owned a conglomerate valued at $300 million. And nobody, absolutely nobody, knew that half of that money was in my name. Arthur insisted on it. "If something happens to me," he'd say, "you need to be protected." So we created complex legal structures, shell companies, trust funds. I was the chairwoman of the board on paper that only our closest lawyers knew about. When Evan turned 30, he married Samantha, a beautiful, ambitious, cruel woman. From day one, she treated me like I was a useless old woman who had lived off Arthur. "It must have been hard for you," she once said to me with a fake smile, "never working and being completely dependent on your husband." I bit my tongue. Arthur despised her too, but Evan was blind with love, or lust. I was never sure which. The following years were a silent torture. Samantha began to pressure Evan to ask Arthur for money. "Your father is rich, and you live like a common employee," she'd tell him. Evan started to resent his own father. Family dinners became battlegrounds. "Why won't you give me a position in the company?" Evan would demand. "Because you're not ready," Arthur would reply coldly. And I remained silent, watching my family fall apart. 3 years ago, Arthur got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lived for 3 more years, fighting every day. And during those 3 years, Samantha and Evan became unbearable. They visited our house only to ask for money. "We need $50,000 for a remodel," they'd say. We need a new car. The kids need a more expensive private school. Arthur gave them scraps, just to keep the peace. But I saw the truth. They were waiting for him to die to claim everything. One afternoon, 2 months before his death, Arthur called me to his room. He was so thin he looked like a shadow. "Eleanor," he whispered, "when I die, they're going to try to destroy you. They'll say you have nothing, that it was all mine. But you know the truth." He took my hand. "Promise me that when the time comes, you will show them who you really are." I promised. But I didn't know that moment would arrive in the most humiliating way possible. Arthur died on a Tuesday morning. I was by his side, holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for everything, my love. Now it's your turn to shine." I cried for hours. 40 years together. 40 years of love, work, sacrifice. And now, I was alone. The funeral was 3 days later. From the moment I arrived at the church, I felt the stares. Samantha was wearing an expensive dress. Evan, a new suit. My grandchildren, 2 spoiled teenagers, looked at me with contempt. And then the whispers started. "Look at Grandma," I heard one of my grandchildren whisper to the other. "She didn't even buy new shoes for her own husband's funeral." They laughed. My shoes were old. Yes, I had bought them 5 years ago. They were comfortable. I never cared about appearances as much as they did. But in that moment, their laughter stabbed into my chest like knives. Carol, my sister, was sitting next to me. I squeezed her hand, looking for support. She squeezed mine for a second, but then let go and looked away. Even she was afraid to be associated with me in that moment. The service began. The priest spoke about Arthur as if he had known him, but his words were empty, generic. Evan got up to give a speech. "My father," he began, his voice trembling, "was a man who gave everything for his family. He built an empire from nothing." He paused dramatically. "Although in the end, the illness took everything. He died without a penny, but rich in love." Lies, blatant lies. Arthur had left everything perfectly organized. But Evan needed to create that narrative. He needed everyone to believe there was no inheritance, that I was a poor, helpless widow. When Evan stepped down from the pulpit, Samantha leaned in toward me. Her perfume was so strong it made me dizzy. "Poor Eleanor," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, still trying to act like she's important. She smiled, that cruel smile she had perfected over the years. "I guess now you'll have to find a smaller place to live. The house is too big for you alone." I felt my blood boil, but I said nothing. Not yet. My grandchildren, sitting in the row behind us, didn't bother to lower their voices. "Did you see her tears?" said one, so dramatic. As if they were really happy. The other replied, "My dad says Grandpa supported this miserable family for years because she never worked. She just spent his money." Muffled laughter. Carol shifted uncomfortably beside me but remained silent. I looked around the church. There were at least 100 people. Arthur's business partners, friends from decades ago, all looking at me with pity. The poor widow, the woman who lived in the shadow of a great man and now had nothing. The priest finished the service. People began to stand. Some came up to offer condolences. Their words were kind, but their eyes said something else. "Will you be all right?" they asked. "Do you have a place to stay? If you need financial help, don't hesitate to ask." Every word was a humiliation. Me, who had built an empire with my own hands, being treated like a beggar. I nodded politely, thanked them for their condolences, and waited, because I knew what was coming. I looked at my watch. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, Claire would arrive. Claire was more than my lawyer. She had been my right hand for 20 years. The only person, besides Arthur, who knew the whole truth. I had sent her a message the night before. "Tomorrow at 11:30. Bring the documents. Bring the board members. It's time." She had replied with a simple, "It will be a pleasure, Madam Chairwoman." Samantha approached again, this time with Evan at her side. "Mom," Evan said, in a voice that tried to sound compassionate but was just condescending. "We need to talk about your finances. I know Dad didn't leave you anything because it all went to medical treatments. Samantha and I have been talking. We can offer you the spare room in our house." The spare room. They were offering me the spare room. Samantha added, "It's not big, but it's comfortable, and that way you won't have to worry about rent." Something inside me snapped. Not from sadness, from rage. But I kept my face serene. "How generous of you," I said softly. Evan seemed relieved. He probably thought I had accepted. "We can go over today and pack your things," he continued. "Dad's house will have to be sold soon to pay off debts." Debts. What an interesting word. There were no debts, only lies. Carol finally spoke. "Eleanor, if you need to stay with me for a few days while you figure things out." Her voice was timid, almost ashamed. I looked at her, my own sister, the woman I had grown up with, shared secrets, cried, and laughed with. And now she was offering me charity as if I were a stranger. "Thank you, Carol," I replied coldly. "But that won't be necessary." One of my grandsons came over. He was 16. He was holding the latest phone in his hand, a phone that probably cost $1,200. "Grandma," he said, without looking me in the eye, "is it true you don't have any money? Because I was going to ask you to help me with my car. But if you're poor—" Samantha cut him off quickly. "Honey, your grandmother depends on us now. She can't give you anything." She looked at me with superiority. "Hard times teach humility, don't they, Eleanor?" I looked at my watch again. 2 minutes. I could see through the glass doors of the church. The street was still empty, but I knew any second they would appear. The BMWs, the suits, the truth. Evan started talking about the burial arrangements. "We got a simple plot in the city cemetery," he said. "Nothing fancy. We couldn't afford more." Another lie. Arthur had bought a family crypt in the most prestigious cemetery in the city 10 years ago. It was all paid for. But Evan needed to maintain the charade. People began to leave the church. Arthur's casket had already been taken to the hearse. Soon we would go to the cemetery. But before that final goodbye, I needed this to happen. I needed my family, all of them, to see the truth. Samantha was laughing with one of her friends. "It's so sad," she was saying. 40 years of marriage, and he left her nothing. Imagine being completely dependent on a man and then being left with nothing. Her friend nodded with false sympathy. "That's why I always tell my husband I need my own money." And then I saw them. 3 black BMWs, gleaming, stopping in front of the church in perfect synchronization. The murmur of conversations stopped. Everyone turned to look. 2 men in flawless suits got out of each car. They walked toward the church entrance with confident strides. People instinctively moved out of their way. I recognized all of them. They were the members of the board of directors, the men and women who ran the daily operations of our conglomerate, and leading them was Claire. Elegant, serious, with a briefcase in her hand. They entered the church. The silence was absolute. Evan was looking at me, confused. Samantha had gone pale. Carol had risen from her seat. And then Claire and the 6 board members walked directly toward me. They stopped in front of me, and in perfect synchronization, all 6 of them bowed. "Mrs. Grant," Claire said, her voice clear and strong, resonating throughout the church. "The board of directors is waiting. We have urgent matters that require your immediate approval." The world stood still. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes fixed on me. Evan's mouth was open. Samantha looked like she was about to faint. My grandchildren had dropped their phones. And Carol was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time in her life. I rose slowly from my seat. My knees weren't shaking. My hands weren't sweating. After 40 years of silence, this moment felt almost liberating. I looked at Claire and nodded. "Thank you for coming," I said in a firm voice. "I'm sorry to have kept you waiting." Claire smiled slightly. "Madam Chairwoman, time is never an issue when it comes to you." Madam Chairwoman. Those words hung in the church air like a bomb that had just exploded. I saw Evan blinking repeatedly, as if he couldn't process what he had just heard. Samantha had gone rigid, her face alternating between red and white. One of the board members, Mr. Gregory, a man of 60 who had worked for our company for 25 years, stepped forward and offered me his hand. "Mrs. Grant, I am deeply sorry for your loss. Mr. Arthur was a great man, But we know the company is in the best possible hands. The best possible hands. My hands. The hands that had supposedly never worked a day in their life. The hands Samantha had called useless more times than I could count. I shook Mr. Gregory's hand firmly. Thank you, Gregory. Arthur and I built this together. And now I will continue his legacy, as I always have. The last words were deliberate, as I always have. Because I wasn't starting something new. I was simply done hiding. Evan finally found his voice. What is going on here? His tone was sharp, almost hysterical. Who are these people? Why are they calling you chairwoman? Claire turned to him. Her expression was professional but cold. I am Claire Evans, Chief Legal Officer for Apex Holdings. These individuals are the board of directors, and we call your mother chairwoman because that is exactly what she is. Chairwoman and majority shareholder of a conglomerate currently valued at $340 million. $340 million, the number hung in the air. Samantha staggered and had to grab Evan's arm. My son looked at me as if he had never seen me before. That's impossible, he muttered. Dad never mentioned. You never. His voice broke. One of my grandsons, the one who had mocked my shoes minutes earlier, had gone completely pale. The other had his mouth open, staring at the BMWs through the windows as if they were spaceships. Claire opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I have here all the legal documents certifying Mrs. Grant's position as chairwoman of the board and owner of 52% of all shares in the holding company. She held the folder out to Evan. If you wish to review them, you are welcome. Everything is perfectly legal and has been in effect for the last 38 years. 38 years. Since before Evan was born. I had been chairwoman before I was a mother. I had built an empire before my son took his first steps. And he never knew. No one knew. Carol approached slowly. Her eyes were filled with tears. Eleanor, she whispered, why did you never tell me? I looked at her, my sister, the woman who, 30 minutes ago, had remained silent while I was being humiliated. Because you didn't need to know, I answered simply. No one needed to know. Samantha finally reacted. Her initial shock quickly turned to rage. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're not a businesswoman. You're a housewife. You always have been. Claire looked at her with an expression that could freeze hell. Ma'am, I suggest you measure your words. The woman you are insulting is my direct boss. She is the woman who personally approved every major acquisition for the last 15 years. She is the woman who designed the expansion strategy that tripled our revenue. She is the woman who saved this company from bankruptcy on 2 occasions. And she is the woman who, frankly, has more business knowledge in her little finger than you have in your entire existence. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the gaze of every person in that church. Some of Arthur's business partners were nodding slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally fitting together in their minds. I always wondered. One of them spoke up, a man named Stephen, whom Arthur had worked with for 20 years. Why Arthur would turn down certain offers until he consulted at home. He said he needed to talk it over with his wife. We thought it was just courtesy. He laughed bitterly. But it wasn't courtesy. It was necessity. Because you were the one really making the decisions. Exactly. For 40 years, Arthur and I had maintained that perfect dance. He consulted. I decided. He presented. I designed. He was the face. I was the brain. And it worked perfectly, until I no longer needed to hide. Evan took the folder with trembling hands. He opened it. His eyes scanned the documents. Articles of incorporation, share certificates, property deeds. All in the name of Eleanor Grant, his mother, the woman he had treated like a useless burden for years. I don't understand, he finally said. His voice sounded broken, lost. Why did Dad never tell me? Why did you never tell me? I looked him in the eyes. Those eyes that had once looked at me with childish love, then filled with indifference, and finally with contempt. Your father wanted to protect you, I replied calmly. He wanted you to become a man on your own, without the pressure of inheriting an empire. He wanted you to find your own way. I paused. But he also knew you weren't ready, that you probably never would be. Those words hit him like a slap. Samantha intervened quickly. If this is all true, why did you live the way you did? Why didn't you have a chauffeur? Why do you cook? Why are you wearing those old shoes? She pointed at my feet with disdain. I looked down at my shoes. They were old. Yes. Comfortable. Practical. Because money never defined who I am, I replied. Because I don't need external validation. Because I know my worth without needing to prove it to people who don't respect me anyway. Claire intervened again. Mrs. Grant, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we really need your signature on several urgent documents. The merger with the tech firm in California requires your final approval. There are $200 million at stake. $200 million. Another astronomical figure, thrown out casually. I saw Samantha nearly faint. My grandchildren looked at each other, the reality hitting them like a freight train. I turned to Arthur's casket. It was covered in white flowers. Flowers I had personally chosen, flowers I had paid for with my own bank account. A bank account that had over $20 million in liquid cash alone. I walked to the casket and placed my hand on the polished wood. I'm sorry, my love, I whispered. I know you wanted your funeral to be private, quiet. But they needed to know the truth. And this was the moment. Evan dropped the folder. The documents scattered across the church floor. No one moved to pick them up. All this time, he murmured. All this time, I thought you were just Mom. Just Dad's wife. The word just hurt more than he could ever imagine, because it summarized exactly how he had seen me for his entire adult life. Just Mom. Just a wife. Just a woman with no identity. I was never just Mom, I said, turning to face him. I was always Eleanor. I was always a complete person, with capabilities, with intelligence, with power. But you all chose to see me as you wanted to see me, as it convenienced you to see me. My voice wasn't bitter. It was simply honest. 40 years of pent-up honesty finally coming to light. Evan recoiled as if my words had physically pushed him. Samantha, however, was not ready to give up so easily. If all this is true, she said, her voice trembling but defiant, then Evan is entitled to his inheritance. He is your son. He is the rightful heir to all of this. Claire laughed. It was a short, almost disbelieving laugh. Ma'am, inheriting is not an automatic right, it's a decision, and the decisions are made by Mrs. Grant. She turned to me. Would you like me to explain Mr. Arthur's testamentary provisions to your family? I nodded. It was time for them to know everything. Claire pulled another document from her briefcase. Mr. Arthur left a very clear will. To his son, Evan, he leaves the sum of $50,000. Sufficient to start a business or invest wisely, but not enough to waste on luxuries. She paused deliberately. The rest of his personal possessions, valued at approximately $2 million, are designated for charities in his name. The company, the conglomerate, the properties. Everything else has always been, and will remain, in Mrs. Grant's name. $50,000. I saw Samantha doing the math. $50,000 out of $340 million. It was less than 0.02%. It was a pittance. It was an insult to someone who expected to inherit an empire. That can't be legal, Samantha shouted. A father can't just disinherit his son like that. We will sue. We'll get lawyers. This isn't over. Her voice echoed in the church, breaking the sacred silence. Some people murmured, scandalized by her outburst. Mr. Gregory spoke up. Ma'am, I assure you, everything is completely legal. Mr. Arthur consulted with the best lawyers in the country for years to structure this. And besides, he paused significantly. Mr. Arthur didn't disinherit anyone. He simply left what was his. And it turns out, what was his was considerably less than everyone assumed. The majority always belonged to Mrs. Grant. Carol came over to me. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Eleanor, forgive me. I should have spoken up. I should have defended you. When Samantha insulted you, when Evan humiliated you, I should have said something. She took my hands. I'm your sister, and I stayed silent like a coward. I looked at her. Part of me wanted to hug her. Part of me wanted to push her away. But the biggest part of me just felt tired. I know, I said simply. and that is a weight you will have to carry. One of my grandsons, the older one, approached shyly. His eyes were red. "Grandma," he said, we didn't know." I looked at him, 16 years old, almost an adult, old enough to know that mocking an old woman at her husband's funeral was wrong. "No," I replied coldly, "but you did it anyway. Ignorance does not excuse cruelty." He shrank back, ashamed. Claire looked at her watch. "Mrs. Grant, we really must be going. The meeting with the California investors is in 2 hours. We have a private flight waiting." A private flight. Of course we had a private flight. Our company owned 3 corporate jets. I had personally approved the purchase of every one of them. I looked toward Arthur's casket again. The cemetery, the burial. We were supposed to go together, but Arthur would understand. Business was always important to us. "I need 10 minutes, I said. 10 minutes alone with my husband. Then we'll go." Claire nodded. She gestured to the board members, and they all filed out of the church. The BMWs waited outside, gleaming in the midday Sunday. People began to scatter, murmuring among themselves, looking at me with a mixture of awe and respect I hadn't seen in decades. Evan remained motionless, still processing. Samantha was crying, but not from sadness. She was crying from rage, frustration, and unfulfilled greed. I approached the casket. I placed both hands on the wooden surface. "Arthur," I whispered, "I kept my promise. I showed them who I am. Now everyone knows." I closed my eyes. I remembered the first time I saw him. Remembered our first date, our wedding, the birth of Evan. Remembered the nights working until dawn, the crises we overcame together, the victories we celebrated in secret. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for respecting me. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Evan. He was alone. Samantha had gone outside, probably to call a lawyer. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "I need to understand. Why? Why the secret? Why did you never tell me?" I turned to face him. My son. The boy I had held in my arms, whom I had fed, whom I had loved with every fiber of my being. "Because your father wanted you to be your own man," I replied, without the pressure of a powerful last name, without the expectations, without the burden. "But you made me feel like a failure," he shouted. "Always. Every time I asked for help, Dad shut me down. He made me feel incompetent, useless." His words came out like projectiles. "And you know what's worst? Now I find out you were behind it all, that you were the one really making the decisions, that you were the one who said I didn't deserve anything." Tears were streaming down his face. Not tears of sadness, tears of resentment. "Your father and I made those decisions together," I replied calmly. "And we made them because we know you, Evan. At 25, you spent the $100,000 we gave you for a business on a sports car and a vacation to Europe. At 30, you lost $200,000 on stupid investments because you wouldn't listen to advice. At 35, you asked your father for $500,000 for a restaurant, and you ran it into the ground in 6 months because you never bothered to show up for work. Every word was a fact. Every fact was painful." "That was years ago," he protested. "I've changed. I've matured." I looked him in the eyes. "Really? 3 months ago you asked your father for $200,000 for a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity." Arthur investigated. "It was a pyramid scheme. We saved you from losing everything." Again, his face flushed. He had no answer for that. "And today," I continued, "at your father's funeral, instead of mourning his loss, you were calculating your inheritance. Instead of comforting me, you humiliated me. You called me poor. You said your father died without a penny." "That was Samantha," he muttered weakly. "She said that, not me." I looked at him in disbelief. "You were standing right next to her. You nodded. You laughed. You let your children mock me. You offered me the spare room in your house." My voice rose slightly. "The spare room, Evan? To your own mother?" He cringed at my words. He seemed smaller, suddenly, like a scolded child. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." But his apology sounded hollow. It sounded like the apology of someone who regrets the consequences, not the actions. "I know you're sorry," I replied. "You're sorry you won't be inheriting millions. You're sorry your plan failed. You're sorry that now you'll have to work like everyone else." I walked toward him. "But you know what you're not sorry for? You're not sorry for hurting me. You're not sorry for disrespecting me. You're not sorry for disappointing your father." He opened his mouth to protest, but I stopped him with a raised hand. "Your father left you $50,000. It's more than you deserve, honestly. But he was always more generous than I. Use them wisely. Invest in something real. Work hard. Prove you can be the man your father hoped you could be." I paused. "Or waste them. It's your decision. But there will be no more. There will be no bailouts. No more loans. This is your last chance to prove something." Evan looked at me with pleading eyes. "But Mom, I'm your only son, your only family. You can't just abandon me." That word, abandon. As if providing him with $50,000 was abandonment. As if he expected me to maintain his lifestyle without him lifting a finger. "I'm not abandoning you," I replied. "I'm setting you free. For the first time in your life, you will have to stand on your own 2 feet, without Dad's safety net, without my money secretly backing you. Just you and your own abilities." Samantha walked back into the church. She had been on the phone outside. Her face was set with determination. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she announced. "He says we can contest the will. He says there's legal precedent for children who have been unfairly excluded from inheritances." She walked toward me with purpose. "You won't get away with this, Eleanor. We will get what's coming to us." The way she said my name, without the misses, without respect, was telling. Claire appeared in the church doorway. She had heard everything. "Mrs. Grant," she said, her voice professional but with an edge of steel, "I strongly suggest you reconsider that legal action. Our firm has 120 lawyers. We have litigated cases in 3 countries. And we have never, ever lost an inheritance case." She approached slowly. "Besides, you should know that Mr. Arthur included a specific clause in his will. Any attempt to contest it will result in the immediate revocation of the $50,000 designated for Evan. You will be left with exactly 0. Samantha's face went from red to white in seconds. "That's blackmail," she hissed. Claire smiled coldly. "No, ma'am, it's foresight. Mr. Arthur knew human nature very well. And he knew you very well." She looked at Evan. "Your father-in-law gave you one last chance. I suggest you take it." Samantha looked at Evan, waiting for him to say something, to defend her. But my son remained silent, staring at the floor. For the first time in years, he seemed to be thinking about the consequences of his actions. Carol approached again. "Eleanor, I don't want anything. I just want you to know I've always admired you. Even when I didn't know the whole truth, I always knew you were special. Strong." She took my hands. "And I'm so sorry I wasn't strong today, when you needed me." Her words were sincere. I could see it in her eyes. "I forgive you, Carol," I said softly. "But trust is built with actions, not words. It will take time." I looked at my watch. The 10 minutes had turned into 20. Claire was waiting patiently, but I knew time was pressing. "I need to go," I announced. "The burial will continue without me. Claire will see to it that everything is arranged." Evan's head snapped up. "You're not going to your own husband's burial?" His voice was accusatory. "Arthur would understand," I replied. "In fact, he insisted on this. He made me promise that if something important came up, I wouldn't let his death stop the business. We built this together. And now, I continue it. That is the best way to honor him." I walked toward the exit. The board members were waiting outside by the BMWs. But before I left, I stopped. I turned to look at everyone left in the church. My family, Arthur's partners, the friends. "I want you all to understand something," I said, my voice clear and strong. "For 40 years I chose silence. I chose to work in the shadows. I chose to let Arthur shine while I operated behind the curtain. I did it for love. I did it for strategy. I did it because in that time, a businesswoman faced obstacles a man did not." I paused, letting my words sink in. but Arthur is gone, and I no longer have a reason to hide. So from today on, you will all know who I am. The chairwoman of Apex Holdings. A woman who built an empire. A woman who needs no one's validation. I looked directly at Samantha, and a woman who will not tolerate disrespect ever again. I walked out of the church. The sun was shining brightly. The 3 black BMWs waited in a perfect line. Claire opened the door of the middle car for me. "Madam Chairwoman," she said with genuine respect. Before getting in, I looked back one last time. Evan was standing in the church doorway, watching me leave. His expression was a mixture of confusion, resentment, and something that might have been admiration. Samantha was beside him, furious. My grandchildren were staring at the cars with wide eyes, and Carol was crying silently. I got into the car. The interior smelled of new leather. Claire sat beside me. The driver started the engine smoothly. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "To the airport," Claire replied, "and then to California." As the car pulled away from the church, I felt something strange. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't relief. It was freedom. For the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to pretend to be less than I was. I didn't have to downplay my achievements. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Claire asked with genuine concern. I smiled. "I feel free," I replied. "Arthur freed me. Even in his death, he gave me the gift of being myself without restrictions." Claire nodded. "He was a great man. But you, Mrs. Grant, are a great woman, and now the world will finally know it." I looked out the window. The streets rushed by, people walking, living their lives, with no idea that a 66-year-old woman had just broken free from 40 years of silence. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan. "Mom, we need to talk, please." I didn't answer. Not yet. I needed time. He needed time. Time to process, to reflect, to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Another message came through. This one was from Carol. "I love you, sister. I've always loved you, and I'll always admire you." "That one," I answered. "I love you too, but I need space." We arrived at the private airport in 20 minutes. The jet was ready, turbines whining. I walked up the stairs slowly. My knees protested a little. 66 years of life, of work, of sacrifice, but also 66 years of achievement, of love, of building. Inside the jet, the board members were already seated, reviewing documents. They greeted me with respect as I entered. "Mrs. Grant," said Mr. Gregory, "we've reviewed the final numbers for the California merger. With your approval, this will make us the 3rd largest conglomerate in the region." "Third largest," I smiled. Arthur would have been proud. Saturday. Claire handed me the documents. I reviewed them carefully. 40 years of experience allowed me to spot problems in contracts that others would miss. "Here," I said, pointing to a clause. "This revenue projection is too optimistic. We need to renegotiate this percentage." Mr. Gregory nodded. "Impressed. You're right. We'll adjust it." The jet took off smoothly. I looked out the window as the city grew smaller. Somewhere down there, my husband was being buried. Without me, guilt tried to creep into my heart, but I pushed it away. Arthur would understand. He, more than anyone, would understand that business couldn't wait, that opportunities don't pause for grief, that life continues, even when we feel we can't. During the flight, I worked. I reviewed contracts. I signed approvals. I discussed strategy with the board. It was comforting. After days of sitting by Arthur's bedside, watching the illness slowly consume him, being back in my element felt like breathing again. Claire was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "What are you thinking?" I asked her. She hesitated for a moment. "I was thinking about how much I admire you. Most people in your situation would have canceled this meeting. They would have stayed home, crying. I have cried," I answered honestly. I cried every night for 3 years as Arthur slowly died. I cried this morning. I will cry tonight. But right now, I have a responsibility to 3,000 employees who depend on the decisions I make today. I looked out the jet window. Grief is important, but life doesn't stop. And Arthur wouldn't want me to stop. Claire nodded. That's why he loved you. Because he saw you. He truly saw you. Exactly. Arthur saw me when no one else did. In a world that expected women to be decorative and silent, he gave me room to be powerful. In an era where wives were supposed to stay home, he made me his equal partner. It wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, fights, moments of frustration, but we always respected each other. Did you ever regret it? Claire asked. Keeping the secret for so long? The question surprised me. I thought carefully before answering. Sometimes, I admitted, especially when Evan was little. I wanted him to know his mother was more than a housewife. I wanted him to see me as a role model. I sighed. But Arthur was right. If Evan had known, he would have grown up with the pressure to inherit. He would have lived under an impossible shadow. At least this way, he had a chance to be himself, even if he didn't make the best of that chance. Mr. Gregory interrupted. Mrs. Grant, I have a sensitive question, if I may. I nodded. Now that the secret is out, what do you plan to do with your public position? Will you continue to be the chairwoman in the shadows, or will you take on the role publicly? It was a good question. One I had asked myself hundreds of times in the last few days. Publicly, I answered without hesitation. It's time the world knows who runs this company. It's time for young women to see that it's possible. It's time for me to stop hiding. We landed in California 3 hours later. A car was waiting. The meeting was at the headquarters of Tech Vision, the tech company we were merging with. It was a company valued at $900 million, specializing in artificial intelligence and automation. Their CEO was a 40-year-old woman named Patricia Chen. Arthur and I had been negotiating with her for 6 months. She knew who I was. She was one of the few people outside my inner circle who knew my true role. We walked into the building. It was modern, all glass and steel. Patricia was waiting for us in the lobby. When she saw me, she smiled broadly. Mrs. Grant, she said, extending her hand, I am so sorry for your loss. Mr. Arthur was an extraordinary man. I shook her hand firmly. Thank you, Patricia. He admired you greatly. He said you reminded him of me when I was young. Patricia laughed. I'm not sure whether to take that as a compliment or a warning. I smiled. Definitely a compliment. We went up to the boardroom on the 30th floor. The views of the city were breathtaking. Patricia's team was already there. 12 executives, half men, half women. They all looked at me with curiosity and interest. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia said, I am pleased to formally introduce Mrs. Eleanor Grant, the chairwoman and CEO of Apex Holdings. There was a murmur of recognition. Some looked surprised. I thought Mr. Arthur was the CEO, one of them said. That was the impression we wanted to give, I replied calmly. But the reality was always different. I sat at the head of the table, and now that my husband has passed, I've decided it's time to end the appearances. It is I who have been leading the negotiations with you for these 6 months. It is I who will approve or reject this merger. And it is I who will be leading you should we decide to move forward. The words came out with natural authority. I wasn't faking confidence. The confidence was real. We spent the next 4 hours going over every detail of the merger. Valuations, synergies, corporate structure, talent retention, everything. I asked incisive questions, challenged assumptions, pointed out risks others had missed. Patricia's team responded with respect and professionalism. Halfway through the meeting, one of her executives, a man in his 50s, said, Mrs. Grant, if you'll permit the comment, you are even more impressive than Patricia told us. And she had already set very high expectations. Patricia smiled. I told them they were about to meet the most brilliant business mind they would ever encounter. Some of you doubted me. She looked meaningfully at the man who had spoken. I hope you now understand why I insisted on this merger, even when other investors were offering more money. I looked at her, questioning. I didn't know that. Patricia nodded. We had 3 offers, 2 for larger amounts. But I chose your company because I wanted to work with you. A woman of your generation who built all this in silence. That's someone I want to learn from. Her words moved me more than I expected. For 40 years, my recognition had come only from Arthur. Now, a successful, brilliant woman from a new generation was telling me she admired me. "The honor is mine," I replied sincerely. "Women like you are building the future that I could only dream of when I was young." We continued working until it was dark. Finally, all points were resolved. The contracts were ready to sign. Before signing, I said, "I want to talk about something important." Everyone looked at me attentively. "This merger will create the largest tech company in the region. It will employ over 8,000 people, and I want to make sure our values are aligned." I paused. "I want 50% of executive positions to be filled by women within 3 years. I want mentorship programs for young women. I want guaranteed and annually audited equal pay. I want this company to be a model of what is possible." There was a moment of silence. Then Patricia began to applaud. "Exactly what I was hoping you'd say." She stood up and extended her hand. "You have a deal, Mrs. Grant. I don't just accept those terms, I embrace them completely." We shook hands. The rest of the team applauded too. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt that Arthur would be proud, not just of the merger, not just of the financial success, but of using our power to create real change. We signed the contracts. $200 million changing hands with a few strokes of a pen. When we finished, it was almost 10 o'clock at night. Patricia insisted we stay for dinner. We went to an elegant restaurant downtown. During dinner, we talked about everything except business. Patricia told me about her childhood in San Francisco, the daughter of Chinese immigrants. I told her about meeting Arthur, about building an empire in secret, about the price of silence. "Did you ever regret it?" Patricia asked, echoing Claire's question. "Not getting the public credit for all those years?" I thought about my answer. Public recognition never mattered to me as much as the real impact. Arthur and I built something that changed thousands of lives. We created jobs, opportunities, wealth. That mattered more than seeing my name in magazines. I took a sip of wine. But now that I can have both the impact and the recognition, I'm not going to turn it down. We returned to the hotel around midnight. Claire had booked the presidential suite. When I was finally alone in the room, the reality hit me like a wave. Arthur was dead. He had been buried today, without me. My family either hated me or was afraid of me. My son would probably never forgive me. And I was here, in California, in a luxury hotel, after closing a $200 million deal. I sat on the bed and began to cry. I cried for hours. Not silent, dignified tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs. I cried for Arthur, for 40 years of love that had ended. I cried for Evan, for the son I had lost long before Arthur died. I cried for the years of silence, for the times I wanted to scream my truth and couldn't. I cried until there were no tears left, until my body was exhausted and my mind was finally empty. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I was 66 years old, and it showed. Wrinkles around my eyes, lines on my forehead, gray hair I had stopped dyeing years ago. But I saw something else too. I saw strength. I saw determination. I saw a woman who had survived everything and was still standing. "Good morning, Madam Chairwoman," I said to my reflection. I smiled. It was the first time I had called myself that out loud. My phone had 27 messages. 15 were from Evan, 5 from Samantha, 4 from Carol, and 3 from unknown numbers, probably reporters. I read Evan's first. They started with anger. "How could you leave Dad's funeral?" Then they moved to please. "Please, Mom, I need to talk to you." And finally, they ended in something that might have been genuine reflection. "You're right. I've been a terrible son. Give me a chance to change." Samantha's messages were predictable. Legal threats, accusations of cruelty, demands for money disguised as concern for the grandchildren. I deleted them without finishing. Carol's were different. Messages of support, apologies, memories of our childhood. "Remember when we were 8 and 10 and you said you'd be important one day?" I laughed. "You always knew who you were. Forgive me for forgetting." That message made me smile through my tears. Claire knocked on my door at 7. "Good morning, ma'am. We have a flight back at 9. I opened the door. She looked at me and knew immediately I had been crying. "Are you all right?" she asked, with real concern. I'm processing, I answered honestly. Yesterday was my husband's funeral, and I closed a business deal. Today, I have to decide what kind of relationship I want with my son. It's a lot. Claire nodded. May I be candid? I nodded. You don't owe Evan anything. You've given him everything. Now it's your turn to receive. She was right, but it was more complicated than that. He was my son. Despite everything, despite the disappointments and humiliations, he was still my son. The baby I had held, the boy I had comforted during nightmares, the young man who had once told me I was the best mom in the world. Somewhere inside the bitter, resentful man, that boy still existed. Or was that just my desperate hope? I didn't know the answer. We flew back on the jet. During the flight, I checked emails. There was one from the Human Resources Department, Mrs. Grant. Now that your position will be public, we need to prepare a press release. Do you have preferences on how we handle this? I thought carefully about my response. This release would define how the world saw me. I want complete honesty, I wrote. For 40 years, I was the co-president in private. Now, I am assuming the role publicly. Don't minimize my past contribution, and don't exaggerate. Just the truth. We landed at noon. There was a car waiting, but this time, I asked to be taken straight home. To the house Arthur and I had shared for 38 years. A 10-bedroom mansion in the best neighborhood in the city. The house Samantha had assumed I'd have to sell because I couldn't afford it alone. The irony made me smile bitterly. I could buy 10 houses like this without a second thought. The house was empty. The staff had been given the day off for the funeral. I walked through the silent halls. Every room held memories. The living room where Arthur and I planned strategies until dawn. The dining room where we celebrated our first $1 million with a cheap bottle of champagne. The office Arthur never used because he preferred to work at the company, but which I had turned into my secret command center. Everything was steeped in him. I went up to our bedroom. Arthur's scent still lingered in the air. His clothes in the closet, his books on the nightstand, his watch on the dresser. I sat on the bed and hugged his pillow. I did it, my love, I whispered. I showed them who I am. But God, how it hurts to do it without you. The silence of the house was deafening. For the first time in 40 years, I was completely alone. Without Arthur. Without my son. Without anyone. The doorbell rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I went downstairs slowly. Through the peephole, I saw Evan. He was alone, without Samantha. He looked terrible. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, as if he hadn't slept. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave him out there, to let him feel even a fraction of the rejection he had made me feel. But the part of me that was a mother, that would always be a mother, opened the door. Mom, he said immediately. His voice was broken. Please, let me talk, just 5 minutes. I looked at him in silence for a long moment. Come in, I said, leading him to the living room. He stood nervously, like a child in the principal's office. Sit down, Evan, I ordered. He perched on the edge of the sofa. I sat across from him in the armchair that had always been Arthur's favorite. You have 5 minutes. Talk. I don't know where to start, he murmured. How about at the beginning? I suggested coldly. Why did you treat me like trash at your father's funeral? He flinched. Because I was angry. I've been angry for years. His voice trembled. Angry that Dad never gave me a chance. Angry that he always made me feel inadequate. Angry that you both had everything, and I had to beg for scraps. His fists were clenched. And yesterday, I thought I'd finally get what I deserved. That I'd finally be someone. And when you found out you wouldn't be inheriting the empire, I asked, you decided to humiliate your mother to feel better? It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Evan hung his head. It wasn't just that. It's Samantha. She's been in my ear for years, telling me we're poor compared to what we should have, that you and Dad were selfish, that we deserved more. He looked up, and I believed her, because it was easier to blame you than to admit that I was the problem. His words surprised me. It was the first time I had ever heard him take responsibility for anything. Go on, I said. He took a deep breath. Last night, after you left, I stayed at the cemetery, alone, watching them bury Dad, and I realized something. His eyes filled with tears. I never once asked him how he was. For 3 years of sickness, I never just sat with him to talk. I only ever went to ask for money. And now he's dead, and I can never change that. Tears were streaming freely down his face now. And you, Godmom, yesterday. I treated you worse than a stranger. I humiliated you on the worst day of your life. And then I find out that this whole time you've been this incredible, powerful, brilliant woman. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand. And I hate myself. I hate myself for not seeing you, for not valuing you, for being so blind and stupid and selfish. His shoulders shook with sobs. I sat there, watching him. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to hold him like I did when he was a child. Part of me wanted to scream at him for all the times he had hurt me. But the biggest part of me just felt a deep, profound exhaustion. Evan, I said finally, your words are beautiful, but words are easy. Actions are what matter. I leaned forward. For 35 years, I have rescued you from your mistakes. I have paid your debts. I have covered your failures. I have excused your absences. And every time, I continued, I hoped it would be the last, that you would finally mature, learn, grow. My voice was firm, but not cruel. But it never happened. And your father and I had to accept that maybe it never would. Evan looked at me with pleading eyes. But it's different now. Now I understand. Now I can change. I shook my head slowly. Maybe. Or maybe you're just scared because you've lost your access to infinite money. I don't know. And honestly, it's not my responsibility to find out anymore. He stood up abruptly. So that's it? You're giving up on me? His voice rose. I'm your son, Mom. Your only son. How can you just abandon me? That word again. Abandon. As if providing a comfortable life, an expensive education, countless second chances, and now $50,000 was abandonment. I am not abandoning you, I replied calmly. I'm letting you grow up. For the first time in your life, you will have to face the consequences of your decisions without a safety net. But Samantha, he started. I cut him off. Samantha is your wife. Your choice. If she is toxic, manipulative, and only interested in money, that is a decision only you can make. I walked to the window. For years, I have watched you change under her influence, become more bitter, more resentful, more materialistic. And you never said no. You never stopped her when she insulted me. You never defended your father when she called him cheap. I turned to face him. Those were your choices too. Evan sank back onto the sofa. He looked defeated. So, what do you want me to do? What can I do to fix this? It was a good question. What did I want? I thought carefully before answering. I want you to use the $50,000 wisely. I want you to get a real job, not some made-up position at a friend's company. I want you to prove, with actions, not words, that you can be responsible. I paused. And I want you to go to therapy, you and Samantha, together. Because your marriage is toxic, and it's poisoning this entire family. And if I do all that, he asked in a small voice, then you'll forgive me? I looked at him with sadness. Evan, I already forgive you. You are my son, and I will always love you. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It doesn't mean you have unlimited access to my money. It doesn't mean I will ignore the years of disrespect. I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. It means I'm giving you the chance to build a new relationship with me, one based on mutual respect, not financial dependency. He stood up and hugged me. It was sudden, desperate. His arms wrapped around me like they did when he was a boy and he was scared. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. He sobbed into my shoulder. I hugged him back, because despite everything, he was still my baby, my only son. I know, I whispered. I know. We stood like that for several minutes. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red, but he seemed calmer. Can I ask you something? He said, wiping his face. I nodded. Why? Why did you and Dad keep it a secret? Why didn't you just tell the world who you really were? I sighed. It was a fair question. When your father and I started, it was 1985. Business women were rare. Female CEOs were almost non-existent, especially in our industry. I walked to the fireplace, where a photo of Arthur and me from 30 years ago Saturday. We faced a simple choice: fight the sexism and possibly lose clients and opportunities, or work within the system to build something great. I picked up the photo. We chose the latter. And it worked. We built an empire, but always with the understanding that one day I would step out of the shadows. I looked at Evan. Your father died before we could do it together, but he made me promise that when he was gone, I would shine, that I would let the world see me. I put the photo back, and that is exactly what I'm doing. Evan nodded slowly. What? What are you going to do now? With the company, I mean. I smiled, just slightly. I'm going to run it, publicly. I'm going to give interviews. I'm going to be on magazine covers. I'm going to speak at conferences about women in business. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. I'm going to be the role model I never had when I was young. And I'm going to make sure other women don't have to hide the way I did. That's amazing, Mom, he said. And for the first time in years, he sounded genuinely proud. Dad would be so proud of you. His words touched me deeply. Thank you, sweetheart. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Evan looked at his watch. I should go. Samantha's waiting. I have a lot to talk to her about. He walked to the door, then stopped. Mom, can I come visit? Not to ask for money, just to talk, to really get to know you. I considered his request. Once a week, I said finally. Sundays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Here, just you and me. No Samantha, no kids, no hidden agendas. Just a mother and son, trying to rebuild something that's been broken for a long time. His eyes lit up. I'll be here. I promise. I opened the door for him. Evan, I called as he was about to leave. He turned. The $50,000 will be available in a week. Claire will contact you with the details. Use it well. I will, he promised. I swear. He left. I watched him drive away in his modest car. A car he would probably have to maintain himself now that the easy money was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it. The conversation had left me emotionally exhausted, but it had also given me something. Something like hope. Maybe Evan really could change. Or maybe he couldn't. Time would tell. My phone rang. It was Carol, I answered. Hi, sister, she said, her voice timid. Can I come over? I looked at the clock. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Of course, come now. She arrived 20 minutes later with a small suitcase. Are you going on a trip? I asked, confused. She shook her head. No, this is for you. She opened the suitcase. It was full of old photo albums. When Mom died, I kept all the family albums. I thought maybe you'd want to remember happier times. I took one of the albums. It was from our childhood. Pictures of Carol and me playing, celebrating birthdays, graduations. Thank you, I said softly. We sat on the sofa and began looking through them together. Remember this day? She asked, pointing to a picture of us. I was about 12, she was 10. We were standing in front of a lemonade stand we had set up. You said one day you'd have your own real business. I laughed and said girls couldn't have businesses. I smiled at the memory. And I told you I wasn't just any girl. Carol laughed too, but there was sadness in her eyes. You were always special, Eleanor. I always knew it. And yesterday, when I should have defended you, I stayed quiet because I was scared. She took my hand. Scared that if I supported you, Evan and Samantha would attack me too, and that makes me a coward. Her tears started to fall. I'm so sorry. You're my sister, and I failed you. I hugged her. I know, Carol. You already apologized, and I told you I forgive you. We pulled apart, and I looked her in the eyes. But I need to know, why are you really here? Is it because you love me, or is it because you now know I'm rich? The question was harsh, but necessary. Carol didn't flinch. That's a fair question. And the honest answer is both. At least, she was honest. I love you because you're my sister. But yes, knowing you're this, powerful, it makes me want to be closer. Not for the money, but because it makes me proud. My sister built an empire. I accepted her honesty. It was more than Evan had given me in years. Okay, I said. We can rebuild our relationship too, but it will take time. Carol nodded. All the time you need. We spent the rest of the afternoon looking at photos, reminiscing, laughing, and crying. When she left, I felt a little less alone. The next day, Claire arrived early with a mountain of documents. The press release goes out tomorrow, she said. We already have interview requests from 15 different outlets. Forbes, Bloomberg, CNN. They all want to talk to you. 15 interviews. The idea was both intimidating and thrilling. Except 5, I decided. The most prestigious ones. I want my story to be told correctly. Claire nodded, taking notes. We also need to discuss your public image consultants, stylists, media trainers. I held up my hand. No, I'm not going to be turned into something I'm not. I am 66 years old. I have earned every one of these wrinkles. I will not hide them. Claire smiled. Perfect. Authenticity is exactly what the world needs to see. Over the next few weeks, my life changed completely. The press release caused a media explosion. The invisible woman who built a $300 million empire was the headline everywhere. My phone didn't stop ringing. Interview requests, conference invitations, business proposals. I gave my first television interview 2 weeks after the funeral. The reporter was young, probably half my age. He started with the obvious question, why keep it a secret for 40 years? Because I had to, I answered simply. In the 80s and 90s, a woman in our industry would have faced constant rejection. Clients who would refuse to work with us. Partners who would doubt every decision. Employees who would question my authority simply because of my gender. I looked directly into the camera, so my husband and I made a deal. He would be the face. I would be the brain. And together, we built something extraordinary. The reporter nodded. Do you regret it? I smiled. No. To regret it would be to deny 40 years of achievement. We did what we had to do. The interview went viral. Millions of views in 2 days. Messages poured in from women of all ages. Thank you for showing it's never too late to be seen. My grandmother cried watching your interview. She said you are the woman she wanted to be. I'm 22 years old, and you are my new hero. Each message touched me deeply. For 40 years, I had worked in silence. Now, suddenly, my story was inspiring people I would never meet. Forbes put me on their cover. The Secret CO. How Eleanor Grant built an empire without anyone knowing. The photo shoot was surreal. They wanted me to wear designer clothes, high heels, heavy makeup. I refused it all. Take me as I am, I insisted. A 66-year-old woman who worked hard her entire life. The photographer was frustrated but finally agreed. The resulting photos were powerful. Me in my office, surrounded by documents. Me in front of one of our buildings. Me, just being myself. Evan kept his promise. Every Sunday at 3 o'clock on the dot, he would knock on my door. The first few weeks were awkward. Stilted conversations about the weather and trivial things. But gradually, we started to talk about real things. He told me he had started therapy just him, because Samantha had refused to go. She says she doesn't need therapy, that I'm the problem, he confided. And what do you think? I asked. I think she's partly right. I am a problem, but so is she. And I don't know if I can fix the marriage if she doesn't want to change. Then maybe you shouldn't fix it, I said gently. Maybe you should accept that some things aren't meant to last. Evan was silent, processing my words. Are you saying I should get a divorce? It wasn't exactly what I was saying, but I wasn't not saying it either. I'm saying you deserve to be happy. And if Samantha makes you miserable, you have to make a decision. 2 months later, Evan informed me he had filed for divorce. Samantha, predictably, was furious. She sued for full custody of the children and an exorbitant alimony. "Let me help you with the lawyers," I offered. Evan shook his head. "No, Mom, I have to do this myself." I used the $50,000 Dad left me to hire a good lawyer. Not the best, but a good one. I smiled. It was the first truly mature decision I had ever seen him make. "I'm proud of you," I said. His eyes filled with tears. "Really?" I nodded. "Really." The divorce took 6 months. It was ugly, painful, and expensive. But Evan held firm. He got shared custody of the children and a fair division of assets. My grandchildren started visiting me too. At first, they were shy, ashamed of how they had treated me. "Grandma," the older one said one day, "we're so sorry for what we said at the funeral." I looked at him. 17 now. Almost an adult. "Why did you say it?" I asked directly. "Because Mom always talked bad about you, said you were a burden on Grandpa, and we believed her." He looked down. "But now we know it was all lies, and we feel terrible." "You can make up for it," I said. "Get to know me. Now, learn from me. Let me teach you what I've learned in 66 years of life." We started spending time together. I taught them about business, about financial responsibility, about the importance of hard work. The older one asked if he could one day work at the company. "When you graduate from college," I replied. "And you'll start at the bottom, as a regular employee. If you prove you have what it takes, you can eventually move up. But there will be no favoritism." 1 year after Arthur's funeral, I held a memorial service. This time, it was different. I invited only the people who had truly known and loved him. Lifelong employees, true partners, real friends. I gave a speech. Arthur Grant was my husband for 40 years. He was my partner in business and in life. He saw me when the world was blind. He respected me when others would have dismissed me. He loved me for who I was, not for who they wanted me to be. My voice broke, but I continued. And now, every decision I make, every achievement I reach, every life I touch, it is all a tribute to him. After the service, Carol approached me with a young woman. "Eleanor, I want to introduce my granddaughter Maya. She's 23 and just graduated with her business degree." Maya looked at me with bright, shining eyes. "Mrs. Grant, you are my inspiration. My senior thesis was on female entrepreneurs who broke barriers. You were the main focus." I was deeply moved. "Would you like to work with me?" I asked, impulsively. "Learn everything I know?" Maya's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" I nodded. "Completely." Maya became my protégé. I taught her everything. The strategies I had developed over decades, the mistakes I had made, and the lessons I had learned. She was brilliant, hungry for knowledge, and reminded me of myself when I was young. 2 years after Arthur's death, the company was stronger than ever. The merger with TechVision had been a resounding success. We had acquired 3 more companies. Our value had risen to $500 million, and I was publicly recognized as the CEO. I appeared on lists of the most powerful women in the world. I gave speeches at universities. I mentored dozens of young women. One evening, sitting in my office overlooking the city, I reflected on it all. I had lost my husband. I had almost lost my son. I had been publicly humiliated. I had cried more tears than I could count. But I had also found my voice. I had stepped out of the shadows. I had proven that a 66-year-old woman could be just as powerful, just as brilliant, and just as capable as any man. And I had inspired thousands of other women to do the same. My phone rang. It was Evan. "Mom, can I bring the kids over on Sunday? They want you to tell them stories about when you built the company." I smiled. "Of course. I'll be waiting for all of you." I hung up and looked at the picture of Arthur on my desk. "We did it, my love," I whispered. "Not the way we planned, but we did it." And in that moment, sitting at the top of the empire I had built, I finally felt at peace. So, was she right, or did she go too far? Can a mother's love have limits, or are there moments when dignity must win out over blood? Write in the comments what you would have done in her place. Would you have given your son more? Or would you have been even tougher? Tell me your story.